Hi, good evening, everyone. Let me know if you can hear me because last time I had some problems, but it should be fine. It should be fine. So just let me know in the chat if you can hear me. We can hear you loud and clear. Wonderful. Okay, that's better. Well, thanks for joining me, everyone. And yeah, we can hear you. Oh, excellent. Um, okay, so good evening. Thank you for joining me. This is going to be quite a serious, somber one this evening. Um, but I just wanted to share with you the story of Tova Friedman, um, who is one of the few children that survived Auschwitz concentration camp. And if you Google if you Google just these two words, Auschwitz and children, and then in the search results go to images, there'll be quite a few images that come up of children behind barbed wire. But then there's also a couple of images of children holding out their hands, or their arms rather. So they're holding it out like that to show the numbers tattooed on their arms. And one of those children is Tova, who at the time was 6. So how did I come across her? I came across her about 4 years ago. Yeah, November 2019. So sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. But I've got fresh lemon and ginger and honey and cinnamon. So, mm. Far Away Kin says, "Oh, hello. I'm glad to finally catch a live stream, but such a happy topic, this one." Yes, very happy. Okay, so as most of you know, I'm Dutch. I was born in the Netherlands and lived there till I was 18. And the Netherlands, in the First World War, we were neutral. We didn't take part in the war. Um, we did take in quite a few refugees from other European countries. And at the start of the Second World War, the Netherlands was also neutral until Hitler invaded. And both my grandparents from my mother's side and my father's side, they lived through this war. And both my granddads were part of, well, one of my granddads was part of what we call the quiet resistance or the silent resistance, which is the very much underground. My other granddad, he was actually part of a unit where that was tasked with blowing up a number of bridges in a city called Arnhem, and there was a movie made about that called The Bridge Too Far. And I didn't know about this until very recently. He never wanted to talk about it. My granddad, well, both of them died many years ago. One died in 84. Oh my days, that's nearly 40 years ago. And the other, um, again, years ago. And the granddad that was part of that one of those units blowing up them bridges, um, he told my dad about it once, but then he never wanted to talk about it ever again. And my dad only told me a couple of Christmases ago. And he was captured by the Germans, taken to a camp. I don't know which one. And somehow he escaped. My granddad escaped from the Nazis and then escaped to England. And that's why when I first went to the UK and I'd speak to him, he'd always go on about pork pies because he came to the UK and started eating pork pies. That's a whole other story, obviously, but I thought how incredible that he managed to escape, and then what his life must have been like in England. This is before email and mobile phones. He just married my grandmother before the war. and how they managed to live their lives and get by and then reunite again. And then obviously they had my dad. I know that the Germans came for my other grandfather, right? My mother's father. They came to my grandparents' house and they were banging on the doors and wanted to be let in. And my granddad was hiding in the attic in a potato sack. And apparently, so the story goes, this German starts shouting at my grandmother. And my grandmother just says, "You won't be, you shall not raise your voice in my house," or something like that, which, you know, risky. But they looked around and they could not find my granddad. My granddad's German was so good that sometimes he pretended to be German, and they fell for it. Anyways, I think he even tried to get a local pastor or a vicar out of prison in the town where he lived or the city where he lived. Anyways, so and I think as a country, the Dutch suffered the most death per capita, which wasn't necessarily because of the people dying, fighting, or in concentration camps that were Dutch, but it was because of they died from starvation when at the end of the war, when the Germans, or towards the end of the war, when the Germans knew they were losing, they cut off all the food supplies, and so there were lots of Dutch people that died that way. Um, and apparently, my granddad would cycle for hours to go and collect tulip bulbs somewhere so that he could bring them back, and my grandma would cook tulip soup because that's all she could do. Anyways, it was a horrendous time, obviously, and because of the impact that's had on the Netherlands, there is so much education about the Second World War, um, especially around Remembrance Day, which for the Netherlands is the 4th of May, and then the 5th of May is what we call Liberation Day. So I've always been exposed to a lot of information about it. But then 4 years ago, I saw a documentary on Netflix, and it made me more curious, or made me want to dive into more stuff. And so I came across these testimonies on YouTube by Holocaust survivors. And one of them was Tova Friedman. And there was something about the way she told her story that really grabbed me. I've put the link in the description of the video, of this video. So do check it out. It's 2.5 hours, so it's very long. And I got into a habit of watching bits of it in the morning before going to work, and then again in the evening after coming back from work. But also at work, I would like sneak to the toilet every now and then and keep watching, because there was something about the way she told her story. It was so vivid, and she's very expressive in her face, and it's almost like there's a childlike quality to her. I mean, when she did that testimony, she would have been in her late 70s. But it was that sort of quality that she really drew me in. And the stuff she went through was horrendous. And after watching it, I looked at that picture again of her in the concentration camp, holding out her arms, showing the number tattooed on her arm to the Russian photographer. And I thought, oh, I wish there was a way that I could reach out to that girl. She was 6 at the time, just to say something, and to say, your story will be heard, it will be shared, and it will make an impact so many, like 70 odd years later. Um, and I found a way to contact her. and she got back, and I couldn't believe it. So I'll read that out. But first, I just want to tell you more about her story. So, um, because I took as I was watching it, I took loads of notes. Oop. Because I thought I really wanted to give her my undivided attention and really listen to her. So, lots of notes indeed. Um, so Tova was born in Poland on the 7th of September 1938. And she was born in a town called Danzig. Now, this was just a year before the Germans invaded Poland. They, like, she was born on the 7th of September 38, and Germany invaded Poland September 39. And basically, they bombed the town. The only reason that her and her mom and dad went in is because they were out celebrating her birthday. So when they came back, their house was gone. And then they ended up in a ghetto. So for those of you who aren't that familiar with, what happened during the war, Jewish people were put in ghettos to isolate them and to separate them from, the rest of society. So it's not like everybody went that all the Jews were just sent to concentration camps straight away. There was a whole funneling process, and this is quite important. It had all been planned, and that's quite a scary thing about it, and I'll get to that in a bit because Tova's got some thoughts on that herself. Um, and apparently one of Hitler's orders was leave no witnesses, and that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this live stream now, is because obviously Tova is a witness, and she's talking about this. She has talked about this a lot, and she does a lot of education around this. And I thought, well, this is my way of helping her get her testimony out as well. So these ghettos obviously weren't very nice places, and her grandparents were in the ghetto before them, and she said there were about 50 people in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment with just one bathroom. Bradu in the chat is asking, is this going to be about the Israel-Palestine conflict? No, this is about one person who survived the Second World War, including the ghetto, a labor camp, and a concentration camp. And because it was Remembrance Day on Saturday, and then we had Remembrance Sunday, I thought I just wanted to share her story. Okay, so they're in the ghetto, and she said that her parents always wanted her to know the truth of the situation. They never lied to her about anything. They were quite clear about what was happening, just so that she knew what to expect and therefore how to survive. She was only 1 year old at this point. So a 1-year-old in the ghetto with her parents and her grandparents. And then one day her grandparents were taken downstairs and shot because there were too many people in the ghetto. And the camps, the concentration camps where they would end up, um, weren't ready to take in as many Jews as there were. So the Germans planned to kill a whole bunch of them on the way, some by shooting them and some by starving them. There were, and again, all this was planned because they could only kill people at the rate that suited the Nazis. Because for, oh God, I mean, I just can't believe any of this ever happened. And then you look at what's happening all over the world at any given time. It's like people never learn. But they had to keep a certain number of Jews alive to do the work, and to bury the dead. So Jews had to dig graves for their own parents. And Tova was in that ghetto for about 3 years. So it's quite a long time. Especially, as a child, to be there from the age of 1 till about 4, 5, 4.5, 5 years old. That's all she knew of life. She didn't know there was anything else beyond it. And Tova said that what they did was they came for the grandparents first. They were often put on trucks, the elderly, and then taken away. And then everybody else knew that they would never come back again. They were clearing the ghettos of the elderly. And she said in this particular ghetto, there were 6 buildings with a courtyard. And you couldn't get in or out unless you had certain papers, like work papers. And people constantly disappeared. And this is one of the things that Tova said. The whole war was orchestrated by very smart people. And she says that is what's so scary about it. And this is why it's so important that she had to share it with the world and to educate. She said that education without morality is completely worthless. Because she said the people who planned this were psychologists, they were therapists, they were medical directors, they were CEOs, they were doctors, they were big lawyers, they were scientists, they were engineers. She said the people at the top were excellent thinkers. And they are the ones who made this happen because they planned it and they calculated for it. Tova said they knew what would break us. How do you bring terror to a people? You keep all knowledge from them. She says the psychology of terror is the way you destroy a people. Excusez-moi. Can I turn my mic? Can I mute my mic? I mean, it was very musical, but still. Where was I? This psychology of terror is the way you destroy a people. So they would wake up and there were fewer people there in the ghetto. They'd been moved during the night and no one would know where they had been taken. And then Tova said, as I mentioned, there was the clearing of the elderly. How do you destroy an entire nation? You take away the grandparents, the elderly. That's those people that make a family stable. They make them disappear. And after the elderly, they took the intellectuals and the rabbis. So they didn't have a rabbi to talk to. There were no doctors because they were taken away. And a non-Jewish doctor would not come to the ghetto. So people would die from simple pneumonia or colds because there was no one to help them, even with a simple treatment. And again, this was all part of the plan of making sure that a certain number of people would die in those ghettos. And she was in that ghetto for 3.5 years, and there were plenty of ghettos around Europe. So I don't know the number of people who died in those ghettos, but it would be significant. And then Tova said, so when people come and tell me, why did you go, to the ovens like sheep? Tova says, I'd like to know how those people who say these things would behave if everything, the whole structure of their society, was destroyed right in front of them. And there were no teachers, and she didn't go to school till she was like 12. She didn't even know what a school was. So she says, we grew up under fear and silence. But in a way, the ghetto was good because she was with her parents and there was some sort of structure. Then one day they were sent to a warehouse where they had to sort through loads of clothes of people that had been shot or transported. They would sometimes shoot people standing by their own grave and then burn them and cover it up. And Tova said, as young as she was, with all these things, like all those clothes and all those belongings that they had to sort through, she thought to herself, she knew then, as young as she was, this belonged to someone who had died, and she could not benefit from it in any way. That's when she was 4.5, 5 years old. Now, she mentioned earlier how there were so many experts involved in running all this, and some of those were nutritionists with PhDs who knew exactly how much food to give to the Jews in the ghettos, so they would die at the rate that would suit the Nazis. They would even prevent them from committing suicide. They took everything away from them that they could use to kill themselves, because they wanted you to die. They wanted them to die the way they wanted them to die. And then they started reducing the rations, so there was less and less food. They would break up families, break up relationships. And this is all before the concentration camps, because it's preparation for the camps. Because they knew they didn't have enough room in the camps. So they had the numbers, they had charts, they had experts telling them. Susan C. is asking, will we hear from Tova? Well, I haven't got her on this live stream, but I've put the link to her testimony, which is about 2.5 hours long, in the description of this video. And I recommend you listen to it. It's horrendous. So watch it in bits. And obviously no one can tell it like she can. I'm just relaying a few things just to help her spread her testimony. Where was I? Okay, so she's talking about how it's all about logistics and planning. And first people were taken away by trucks and then by train. She said the trains were coming for us, but there was only so much space on the train. So in her ghetto, 500 people had to die before the trains could come and take them away. So that's why they began to give less and less food, so a certain amount of people would die at a certain rate. Of Tova's family, 150 family members were killed. On her mother's side. And she would say how, as I said earlier, there were 6 buildings in the ghetto, 4 stories high. One day, suddenly, one would be empty. Um, so then the ghetto that she was in was had to be liquidated. Um, so Tova, her mum and dad, she would have been 4.5, 5 years old then, were taken out of their building at gunpoint to a church area. And the Nazis just started shooting. So anyone who hadn't died of starvation or who hadn't been transported was taken to that little courtyard to be shot. And they would have probably had an order, shoot this many, like shoot a certain number. Um, and somehow she didn't get shot, and her mom and dad did not get shot. And she asked herself, why wasn't I shot? She says, we don't know. I'll never understand how I made it, because she says, if I believed in real miracles, that would have been a miracle. The first time, sorry, someone in the chat says, Lord Snapcase, it's me, Julian. Hi, hello. Edinburgh Julian, Lord Julian. Thanks for joining. Right, so the first time she escaped death, if you like, is on her first birthday, when they were out to celebrate her birthday, and then their house got bombed. The second time is at this mass shooting, which was a massacre, a serious massacre. And she said suddenly it went quiet. They had gotten the number that they wanted, so they stopped shooting. Nice to see you, Lord Julian. Appreciate it. And then they had to clean up, because one of the mottos was, leave no witnesses. And her mother, as I said earlier, was always very clear with Tova about what was happening. So she said, okay, they've stopped shooting now. They're not going to shoot again. So, sorry, just checking my notes. Yes, they stopped shooting. They will not shoot anymore. And Tova believed it. So they got up, they looked around, and there was blood everywhere. And then the cleaning up began. So the survivors, after they'd cleaned up, which means picking up body parts and burying the dead. Once that was done, they were taken away. And her mother said to her, after that shooting, they stopped shooting. They're going to kill us a different way. We will simply have to wait and see. Tova said there were 23 people left to bury the dead, and she was the only child that was left. So they dug graves everywhere. They didn't dig a mass grave. They just dug individual graves. And she said, I picked up a hand, I picked up a foot or a head. And her father would say prayers for the dead. Now, these are Jewish prayers. It's called a Kaddish. I don't know much about Jewish culture or Judaism. But Tova said that this was a prayer that praises God. And throughout her life, she's really struggled with that idea. She thought, how can you praise God when this is happening? But I'll get back to that in a bit. So then they had to go into the buildings to straighten everything up. to make it look as if nothing had happened, no sign of anything. So once that was done, this is 1943, so she'd been in that ghetto for about 3 years. They were taken to a labor camp called something called Starchowice. I'll have to check that out. Which was a labor camp, so not a death camp like Auschwitz. And she said that they were taken there first because the ovens weren't ready yet. So this camp, she said, had 4 towers with SS soldiers, sorry, and barbed wire, and sort of little, what she describes as little huts or buildings. It was it was an old camp from the First World War, and her parents were made to work in a factory all day, and she would stay there. And her mom helped her practice how to behave, and with some of the other kids that were there, they would train train themselves in recognizing the marching boot sounds. She says that this is something that stayed with her throughout her life, the sound of the boots of the Nazis. And they would figure out by the sound of these boots which SS person was walking past or was coming close. And she kept saying how clever kids are, how they keep figuring things out like that. And she said, she said in another interview that children at that age are more like animals. And by animals, she doesn't mean like wild, but she means more instinctive, I guess, more in tune with certain things. So she'd been told by her mom, don't ever make any eye contact with the Nazis. Keep your hands behind your back and be silent. Now, there was one time where a woman had been face to face with a German officer and didn't give him right of way. So everyone was gathered together so they could watch this woman being shot to teach them a lesson and to make an example of her. And Tova's mother made Tova watch. Again, this was part of her mom believing that Tova needed to know what was happening and how to avoid it. So this woman was shot, and her 3 little children and husband run over to her dead body. And that's how Tova learned never to look a German in the eye. She said, you've got to survive somehow. Then she talks about, again, the hunger and the starvation and how the kids could get very violent. She was quite scared of the kids, and how the SS was watching them all the time. And then there were rumors flying around saying that they would be leaving that camp. And so the rations decreased again. So more people died of starvation before they moved them on. And she says Jews were digging graves for Jews. Her father then told Tova's mum that, oh, somebody's just left something. Oh, Julian's just said in the chat, the Kaddish, although praising God, is a huge plea for peace for the children of Israel and the whole world. Thank you for that. So her father said to Tova's mum they should hide Tova in the hut because at the top there's something that she describes as a double ceiling. And that's where she would hide during the day while her parents were working in the factory. And then it was time for the camp to be liquidated. So you see a similar thing happening that happened in the ghetto. Now it was happening in that camp. And in the ghetto, they took the elderly, the elderly away first, and the intellectuals. In this camp, they came for the children. And the term for it is kindersrein, which means cleansing it of children. And Tova says how some babies, were dismembered as the parents were holding on to them while the Germans were trying to take them away. And a day earlier, the Jews had been told to dig graves for these kids. Obviously, they didn't know that they were digging graves for their own children. And then Tova says, you see how they used us at every step, at each step of the way they used us to kill our own people, our children, our parents. She says it's good psychology, right? Because those people don't want to live anymore. That's how you break them. That's how you break people. So the kids are taken away. In the distance, they hear shooting. And then their bodies were burned. 1 second. Sorry, guys. I knew this. I said this was going to be a heavy one. But I'm hoping that somehow talking about this stuff somehow might stop it from happening again. So, Tova, which is probably very naive of me, but there you go. Tova says, to me, all of Poland is nothing but a burial ground for the Jews and nothing else. She said she disassociated a lot. You know, that's how your mind protects you. And then she says something happened that was interesting. So one day, while she's hiding in that hut and her parents are out at work, and an SS soldier came in. And Tova still wonders, did he see me or not? He just walked out again. And she says, maybe he did see me, but he simply wasn't in the mood to kill a child that day. And then they were transported to Auschwitz. The men were separated from the women. I don't know at which point she got separated from her dad because they were still together as a family in that camp. But they were put on a cattle car train. I know that her dad ended up in Dachau, which is another concentration camp about a 9 hours drive from Auschwitz. So they're on the train, and it's incredibly hot on the train, and it's dark, and nobody knows where they're going. And there were so many people packed in those, and it's a train for cattle, right? It's not for humans, but they were transported like cattle, and as many stuffed in those trains as possible. She said, you know, you could only stand, and it was dark. And her mum told her, there's no place to sit here. You can only stand and sleep. You also have to sleep while you're standing. There is no bathroom or toilet. So then when Tova asks, what do I do if I need to go? Her mum says, just go where you're standing, as everybody did. And she said women were screaming and crying. It was a 3-day trip. So 3 days like that. Susie Glucksman says, hi, Menno, I'm late, but as a descendant of Holocaust survivors, I think you were doing this. Thank you. I try and hold it together, but it's not easy. And no matter how many documentaries I see about this stuff or how much I hear from others, I just can never get over the horrors of it. She said people were dying in that train from exhaustion and some from hysteria. And some people on the train started killing others because they went nuts. because that's what that kind of stuff does to a person. So then they arrived in Auschwitz. Yes, the men had to go to Dachau, and her mom just said, "We're gonna stay in Auschwitz." Um, this is before they got on the train. The mom said, "Okay, we're going in different directions. He's going to kiss you goodbye, and then he's leaving this place." So then Tova says, "Normally, we would have been killed right away, but it was a Sunday. So those Germans working in the camps who thought they were good Christians, they wanted to honor the Sunday, and so not all crematoria were used. So again, Tova escaped death simply because of that. She passed an inspection and then she had her head shaved. And she says how women looked so different after they'd all had their heads shaved. And then it became all about survival. Everything was just about how you survive the next day. And then once there was a female Nazi who hit her, and Tova thought to herself, "You can hit me all you want. You will never know how much you hurt me. I will never cry in front of you." And she says she doesn't remember that much about daily life, but she remembers incidents. Um, and then she got sick. She had scarlet fever. Um, so she was put in a hospital. She says the hospitals weren't there to help people get better. The hospitals were only there so that the diseases didn't spread to the German troops. After she got out of the hospital, she recovered. She was then taken to a children's camp, and she didn't know there were other children there. She thought she was the last Jewish child alive. Um, and they were taken to what used to be a gypsy camp. So all the gypsies had been killed. So now it was free to use it just for children. And that's where she met other kids and some that she knew from the ghetto that had survived. And that's where she got tattooed. Um, and the woman who tattooed her arm with the number, she was 5.5 years old, was trembling as she did it. And she said to Tova, "I'm going to give you a small number. So in case you survive, you can cover it up with a sleeve." And then she learned her number. And somehow she was proud of learning the number. And her number, I wrote it down somewhere. Anyways. And here again, this is where Tova is talking about how smart kids are. And they would say to each other, "Hey, I just saw your mommy and daddy," and then point at the smoke coming out of the chimneys. As Tova said, we all knew that eventually we are going to be smoke. It was just a matter of time. And she talks a bit about Dr. Mengele and his experiments on the twins, because she met those twins. There were lots of rats in the camp. She says it's a miracle that they didn't touch me. And she's talking about how there were dead bodies everywhere, even cut up corpses. She said we had to put them in a room full of corpses. And the kapos, Jewish women, told the kids to take these corpses and body parts away. And then one day, they were given breakfast. Now, normally they were just given some kind of watery substance, but this time she said it was more like porridge and it felt like heaven. And all these kids all also knew that meant that they were going to die next. Um, but she was so happy to eat, to have something to eat that was like proper food. Um, and then they were told to walk to the crematorium. It was very cold, and she barely had like some of them barely had proper clothes to wear, or proper shoes. And she said that they could see frozen bodies lying outside. And of course, they were told to go and have a shower. And they all knew it wasn't going to be an ordinary shower. They were told to put up their clothes. That was a number. Peppermint Patty. Yes, Tova's number was A27633. That's right. So these kids were just standing there naked for ages, she said. And then suddenly there was lots of shouting, stuff in German that they didn't understand. And they were told to go back to the barracks. Apparently, they got the wrong barrack. So again, she cheated death, if you like. And on the way to that, when they went from the barrack to the crematorium, as they were walking down behind a fence, there were lots of women crying and screaming, and one of them was her mum, who she hadn't seen for ages, and her mum had called out her name, and Tova was surprised. She's like, "Oh, I'm a number. Why is someone calling my name?" But then she recognized her mum, and then the women were asking, "Where are you going?" And Tova just said, "We're going to the crematorium," like in a really dry sort of way, because she thought that's how they all end up. That's where they all go. That's, if you're Jewish. So she didn't understand why women were screaming and crying. And then on the way back, again, these women were there, the mothers, saying, "What happened?" And Tova just said, "Oh, they'll do it another day." So there was something quite matter of fact about it. Then, then she started noticing that her mother was close to dying from starvation, because as young as these kids were, they started to recognize the signs, because the body starts to swell up in a certain way um, when you're starving. And her mother started to show those signs. And these kids, they used to say to each other, they used to point at some people in the camp and go, "Yeah, she's got about 2 weeks left. Yeah, he's got about 1 week." Um, and then one day there was lots of commotion, and her mum took her to the hospital, where there were lots of you know dead people in the hospital, lying in the beds. And her mum put Tova in one of the beds next to someone who must have only died just there, um, maybe even an hour before, because the body was still warm. So Tova's mum said, "Lie here, lie really still, don't move, don't do anything." And then her mother hid somewhere else. Then the Germans came in and they were shouting and they started shooting. And Tova didn't budge at all. And then it went quiet, and her mom came over again, came over to get her. And a few hours later, the Russians came, um, and the camp Auschwitz was liberated. And that's when um, someone from the Russian army took pictures of the children. And one of these pictures you will find when you go to Google and just type in children Auschwitz and go to images, and you'll see that image of these children holding out their arms. Tova is the one on the very left. Um, and she's only 6 at the time. She was only 6 at the time. This was the 27th of January, 1945. She was 6.5. And then she says, imagine if it was 100, if it was 1 week later, so many more of them would have died. But, you know, it's not like, oh, the Russians liberate the camp. That's it. You can go home. So they stayed in Auschwitz for 6 months, and the Russians fed them. Sorry. The Russians fed them. But this was army food. It was too heavy for these people who hadn't eaten a proper meal for years, some of them. So then people started dying from overeating. And her mom only gave her tiny bits. So first just some bread, then some bread and some butter, and then some bread, some butter, and some sugar. So she built it up slowly. And then her mom took her around Auschwitz. I guess because her mom wanted Tova to know exactly what had happened, and even showed her bars of soap that had been made of human fat and lampshades that had been made of human skin. And then after 6 months, the Red Cross arrived and gave them some sort of certificate, a piece of paper to show so that people would know um, that they weren't wild vagabonds, if you like, because obviously they were in a right state. But to be kind to them and to help them. Um, there was something that I saw or that I heard from other testimonies is that when these people finally left the camps and then they went home, their homes were gone or somebody else was living there, and how much anti-Semitism they then experienced in what used to be their home. And when they got off the train and they were allowed to travel free because they had that certificate, they saw an old neighbor, and Tova's mom said hi to the neighbor, and the neighbor just went, "What are you doing here? I thought Hitler had killed you all." And her family had lived in that, had a 200-year history there. And then the Russians took over control of Poland, and it became communist. And then Tova said that the people who had set us free then imprisoned us. After a year, they managed to be reunited with her father. So it's quite something that she survived, that her mom survived, and that her dad survived Dachau concentration camp, and that they managed. Well, it took a year, but they found each other, and then they wanted to get out of Poland. And the irony is, they then fled to Germany, to Berlin. Um, and then she made her way with her mom and dad to the States. She also, when she was 12, and she also lived in Israel for 10 years. And her mom apparently really struggled with life. And even though she'd taken Tova on that tour of Auschwitz, and she'd always kept her informed, when she was a teenager, she would often said to Tova, "You don't remember any of it, do you?" And Tova would say, "No, I don't," even though she did. But then later on, Tova said this was a way that they were saving each other. You know, her mother had tried to save her all that time, and now she was trying to save her mom. Oh, that was one thing that happened when they arrived in Auschwitz, that her mom never got over. When they got off the train, Tova's aunt was there, her mom's sister, who had 2 children. And when you got off the train, people were sorted straight away: death or work. And her aunt was pointed to death. But she had 2 young children. So she pushed children towards her sister, Tova's mom, and asked her to look after them. But they're in this queue, and there's this German with the clipboard, you know, and they were meticulous with all the information that they kept. And Tova's mom had a piece of paper that's had the number 3 on it, um, you know, for the number of members of the family: mom, dad, Tova, 3. And just in front of her, there was someone who had lied about the number in their family, because they had been trying to save children that belonged to somebody else. And when the Nazi looked, I think it was a man, looked at him and said, "You're lying," he got shot right in front of everyone, and the children too. So Tova's mum thought, if I lie, then we're all gonna die. I can't believe I'm telling this, and this is a real story. So when she was asked, "How many in your family?" she said, "3." So her sister died, and the children died with her in the concentration camp. And there's something Tova's mom had never been able to live with, and she died quite young, when they were in the States. She didn't want to live anymore. Um, Even though throughout it all, she had shown so much bravery and helped Tova survive. Um, she couldn't deal with it. It ruined her. Someone's asking me, "What are your thoughts about what's happening in Palestine?" I think it's horrific. think it's horrific what happened on the 7th in their kibbutz. I think it's horrific what's happening. I think it's horrific how many innocent people are dying. I read about a hospital in Gaza where they've run out of electricity. There are 39 babies that are relying on oxygen, so they'll all be dead now. Sorry. I have no answers. I have no idea how this is going to ever work itself out. I don't know. And I mean, I was born in '76. It's always there's always been a huge conflict there. I don't know what the answers are. But back to Tova. Right, her mom died just after Tova got into college, so she was only a teenager when her mother died. Um, and earlier I mentioned that she's really struggled with the idea of praising God. And she was asked in an interview, I think only 2 years ago, how do you feel about God now? And she said, I struggle with God because she said in that Kaddish, that prayer for the dead, apparently you ask God for forgiveness. But she said, I think God should ask us for forgiveness. Us, obviously, I'm not talking about myself, but the Jewish people. This is Tova saying he owes us an explanation and asks us for forgiveness. And then she laughs and she says, I know that's not very Orthodox because she came from an Orthodox family and she's been studying Judaism since she got to the States. And she then became a therapist because she felt that was her responsibility. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could maybe try to help and ease the pain for some people. And one thing that's so extraordinary, despite all this horror, is one of those other children in that photograph, of the children at Auschwitz, also ended up in the States and ended up being a teacher to one of her grandchildren. And that's how they reconnected. Isn't that incredible? And there was another story once that I heard by another, um, I think she was French, a French Jewish woman. And so this is a completely different story. She was taken to Belgium with her husband. They'd only just got married. Her parents were already in a camp in Belgium. And when she got there, her dad was very ill. And one evening, they were put on a train and transported to Germany. When they were on the train, she hatched a plan with her husband to jump. They were going to try and jump off the train because she thought, we're not in Germany yet. Now we can jump. If we can't jump once we're in Germany, then it's too late. And somehow, I don't know how, they managed to jump and found safety somewhere. But she left her dad on the train. And for years, she would beat herself up for that she left him there as sick as he was. He couldn't jump. And then one day, about 20 years later, I think, she was on holiday in Israel, and she's walking down the street with her husband, and somebody calls her name, and she turns around. Oh, crap at this. And this woman says, I have a message from your father. Her father died either on the train or very soon after they came off the train. But after she and her husband had jumped, her dad said to this other woman on the train, so this other woman on Israel who called out her name had been on that train with her and survived. Her dad, after she had jumped, had told this woman he was the happiest man alive. What are the chances? Julian says, I was there in Israel when Hamas attacked on the 7th of October and you were under missile fire for 2.5 weeks. Oh my days. Oh my days. And Julian says, what you see on the news here isn't even half the story. That first week was horrific. Julian, are you back in Edinburgh now? Oh God, that must have been so awful. So, Tova became a therapist, and I've run out of tissues. And after watching her testimony, as I said, I took it in bits. It took me a couple of days to watch it all, but I really wanted to listen to her, give her my undivided attention, and to pay my respects to her that way. Pay, um, and then I thought I was looking at that picture online, and I wanted to reach out to her. I thought I just wish there was a way that I could reach out to that girl in that picture and say somehow like, yes, we'll be listening in the next century. We will be listening to you. And I just Googled her name and and therapist, and I found her. Uh, so I sent her an email, and I wasn't expecting to hear anything back. I won't read out the whole thing, but I basically said, "Dear Tova, I've just finished watching the video on YouTube, a conversation with Tova Friedman, Holocaust survivor. I stumbled across it and have been watching it in parts. Blah 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 blah. It has moved me very deeply. The clarity with which you relay your experiences, the questions you ask, the ironies that you point out. I wanted to drop everything and just give you my undivided attention. I am Dutch. I was born in 1976 in the Netherlands. Because of the impact of the war on my country, we were taught about it in school a lot, and especially around the time when we commemorate the dead, which is on the 4th of May in the Netherlands, and then celebrate being liberated, which is on the 5th of May in the Netherlands. Blah, 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 blah. I am so happy you survived. I am so happy that you became a mother and a grandmother. Um, I'm so happy you are a therapist and helping people ease the pain they feel in life. It was also heartwarming to read that you met two of the other children from the photo and that one was a teacher to your grandchildren. Incredible. I admire your strength and your commitment to telling your story. And it's true, right? One guy heard her talking, then decided to study history, particularly the Second World War, and is now a teacher. So this is how you can see how you can inspire others. I said, I just wanted to reach out to you. The things you have seen and the things you have suffered, the things you have overcome, it will stay with me. I was born in peacetime in the Netherlands in 76. You are the girl in an old World War II photo showing her tattooed arm before my parents were born. I guess this email is a way of reaching out to her to let her know that her story matters and that it will touch people around the world and across time, like me, 74 years after that picture was taken. I wish you many more years of happiness and good health. All the best, and thank you so much for sharing your story, Menno. Oh, and Julian is just saying in the chat that Tova means good. That's good to know. He says there is great importance in Judaism on the connections in life with how our parents named us. I thought you'd like to know that Tova means good. What does Julian mean? Okay, so I sent it off and I thought, this was 2019. And I sent it off from my smartphone, from my iPhone. And then she writes back. 2 days later, there was an email from Tova Friedman in my inbox. And I dropped everything. And it's very brief. And she says, "Hi, I am extremely grateful that you wrote me. At 81, I don't know how many years I will be able to be a witness to these atrocities. Every time I share my memories, I am assuring those children and all those murdered that they are not forgotten. Thank you again, Tova." And then I sent a message back to say, thank you for acknowledging and wish you well and all that. And that's one of the extraordinary things. I need more tissue. I'm blowing bubbles, not the good ones. How incredible is it that you can reach out across the world and almost across time in a way and connect with someone? Her testimony made such an impact on me, as did the fact that we connected for a little while, and that will just stay with me forever. And earlier I thought, let's have a look, let's see what she's up to. And then I found an interview from her from, I think, 2021 on Channel 4. And she's written a book. You can find it on Amazon. It was a Sunday Times bestseller from the New York Times. It's called The Daughter of Auschwitz by Tova Friedman and Malcolm Brabant. Brabant is the name of a province in the Netherlands. So Tova and him wrote it together. He did lots of research for it. The Daughter of Auschwitz, it's called. And another thing that's really incredible, she has grandchildren, and one of them is quite savvy with TikTok. So he created an account, Tova Friedman, the Tova Friedman TikTok account. Let me just look it up to see what it is. TikTok. I didn't know about this until just before starting the live stream, because she'll be 84 now, I think. There you go. Oh, it's called Tova Talk. Sorry. Tova Friedman, and it's got a blue tick. Tova Friedman, Tova Talk, and she's got 517,000 followers. Good for you, Tova. So they're very short videos, because it's TikTok, and this way, her grandson, is helping her get that testimony out. And in just a tiny, tiny little way, I'm hoping that I'm helping her do that too. So check out Tova Talk, check out her book, check out her testimonial. Peppermint Patty says, so her story will be told forever. And yeah, Hitler and the Nazis were all about leave no witnesses. Yeah. No. We're spreading these testimonies as far as we can. So, one thing that she said is, this is from the interview in 2019, is she was very worried about what was happening around the world, not just in terms of anti-Semitism, but also other situations in other countries. And then in that long video, that 2.5 hour video that she does, the guy that she's talking to says, do you think this will happen again? And she says yes. So, how do I wrap this up? I don't really know, to be honest. I think there's something in Poland called the Walk of Life. Let me just look that up. Walk of Life, Poland. The March of the Living. Okay. So at the end of the war, or towards the end of the war, when the Germans knew they were losing, they would send the prisoners of the concentration camps on what were called these death marches. So now every year in Poland, there's something called the March of the Living. It's where people from all over the world basically go on a walk. They marched from Auschwitz to Birkenau, which was the largest Nazi concentration camp. And I would like to do that one day. I would like to think that history won't repeat itself, but I don't hold out much hope for that. Just seeing what's happened since the Second World War and what's happening in the world today. Peppermint Patty says, Menno, have you visited Auschwitz? No, I haven't. I would like to go. I'd like to join that March for the Living. And I just hope it never happens again.
And I hope that by doing this live stream, I've introduced you to Tova, and that you'll take some time to discover more about her story and listen to her. And then I'm sure you'll see very quick why she made such an impact on me. Nah, I'm a mess. So I'm gonna go and have some pizza. Um, Susie Glucksman says, I'm so disheartened by the younger generation not knowing this horror. Ah, I mean, as I said, I'm from the Netherlands, and we get so much education about the Second World War because of the way it's impacted our country, our history. Um, Lord Julian says, you're always a mess. Kind of. I remember, right, when Schindler's List came out, everyone had to watch it, right? I was in secondary school, I guess you'd call that high school at that point. Um, and the whole everyone was made. You don't call it a school in English, I guess, but we call it a school in the Netherlands. So everyone was made by the school to watch it. And I didn't grow up in like a big city or something, but for some reason we had one of the biggest cinema complexes in the country, and we were in the biggest theater, a cinema theater. I remember I was right at the front, and we had subtitles. The subtitles were so big, they were like this big in front of my face. So in order to read the subtitles, you had to literally move your head like that because we were so close to the screen, and the letters were like really jittery. And that's a hard film to watch. But in Holland, it's always been very much been part of education. Um, and also just in general, there's so much on TV and plays and movies and things all about um, the Second World War. And apparently there was a moment where my grandparents were standing. They had a balcony. They were standing on the balcony. My granddad saw a fighter plane, and he turned to my grandma and he said, "The war has begun," um, and it had. So I shall wrap it up now. Um, Thank you for joining me. The next one will be a bit more cheerful, but it's so important that we know about what's happening. What's next? I'm working on a video where I'm responding to Jonathan Van Ness from Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. He posted a video on TikTok talking about trans surgeries for teens and how they're not happening under the age of 16. I'm like, oh, really? So I'm gonna put him straight, so to speak. Put the queer guy straight. So I'm working on that. Although that in itself is quite a disturbing video. And then on Friday, I'm going up to Leeds. Peppermint Patties is asking, are they happening? Of course, yeah. They're, especially when it comes to double mastectomies, they're happening at 12. And so in this video I present the evidence because it's not hidden, it's nothing new, it's all the information's out there, it's been published in medical papers. In the UK, no, but the healthcare system is completely different. Oh, I really need a dry tissue, everything's I'll spare you the details. Woo! In the States, it's like the Wild West because you don't have a centralized bureaucracy for the healthcare system. We do in the UK with the NHS. So what that means is is directives are set centrally and guidelines, and then s- spread throughout, cascaded throughout the system. Um, there's nothing like that in the States. So all these different professional organizations that you have there, so for endocrinologists, for pediatricians, they're more like unions, and they do their own thing. And you know, they're not necessarily operating from a health perspective. Um, some s- with some there's a profit motive, or how can they push their business. It's more about business than healthcare. So that's why there's a big difference. But worldwide, WPATH, um, from their most recent standards of care, their clinical guidelines, they've dropped all minimum age requirements. So even though in the States, it's one particular place with a particular, you know, system that operates in a certain way, and that's why it goes on there. There's no reason why that's not going to come to Europe or to the UK. Because now that WPATH have removed those guidelines are taken very seriously around the world. So if they've dropped, I mean, this is what the trans lobby has been angling for years, to take everything on a case by case basis, right? Everything's just about the individual. Um, it they don't want those, they don't want the gatekeeping, in place. They they're saying get rid of minimum age. They're saying get rid of the requirement for therapy. This has been part of it for years around the world. Um, the Dutch trans lobby is pushing for no therapy to be part of it. Susie Green's been talking about that for ages, and Susie Green is one of the people that helped write those latest guidelines, the Standards of Care version 8. So they try to take everything that could possibly be a barrier. They try to take it out of the way. Why? Because then it's all systems go. It's anything goes. It's a free for all, not free in terms of money, but you want it, you get it. Bodily autonomy, blah blah blah. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts what they want. So I'm so glad to see the pushback here on Turf Island, and I hope that that's going to have some ripple effects. Um, the only thing that WPATH does not recommend under the age of 18 in terms of surgery is phalloplasties. So fake penises, for girls. But how can they even justify that? Because surely that's transphobic. That's gatekeeping. That goes against bodily autonomy. Anyway, so putting that all together in this video to Jonathan Finesse, to basically say to him, mate, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Excuse my French. Um, and he's the one who goes on about, oh, there's so much misinformation. He keeps doing that. There's so much misinformation about trans people. And it's like, you're the one spreading the misinformation. So here are the facts. Boom, boom, boom. Okie dokie. So I'm gonna go to Leeds on Friday, and then I hopefully will see some of you there on the Saturday for Let Women Speak. So I shall wish you a very good evening. Wow, been talking for an hour and a half. Okay, it's 10:30. Right, get yourself a drink. Um, have yourself a nice evening. Hope you've had a good start to the week. And then I shall see you in the next video or the next live stream. Um, and thank you so much for joining me. And sorry for the ugly crying face. Okay? And until then, keep it real and keep smiling. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Ciao, ciao.